What's up, everybody? This is James McCool, owner of paydirt.ghost.io. Today I'm just going to be doing a little tutorial video on how to enter projections into the Rotogrinders LineupHQ optimizer and a little bit of my process when I am building out my lineups for the night. I usually do 50 lineups in MME. I don't like to do 150. I feel that it is a little bit too hard for me to manage with the amount of time that I have. I am also just going to preface really quickly that I am not an MME god. I am not somebody who knows every single trick that there is to know about the LineupHQ optimizer, but the good thing about the way that I have built up the NBA sheets and the range of outcomes is that it is pretty robust in the way that you can utilize it without needing to know a million different tricks. NBA is a sport where when you are going to MME and when you are putting together your exposures, a lot of it is taken care of by the projections themselves. The hardest part about MME and NBA is getting together your groupings and putting together your exposures. The way that I usually handle exposures is utilizing the XVal column that I have in the range of outcomes, which I'll talk about here in a second with why I do it that way. There are going to be other ways that people prefer to MME. There are going to be other ways that you can utilize a process to go with the sheets. And we'll talk through a little bit of that, but I'm just going to be going over first and foremost how to load things into the LineupHQ optimizer, and then a couple little tricks and tips that you can follow to make sure that you're getting your exposures right and that you're not putting yourself onto players that are going to be ultra detrimental, even if they rate well. So right now what I have up is the actual range of outcomes sheet. This is the overall tab. If you guys have not watched the video yet on how to utilize the range of outcomes for NBA, the video is on the range of outcomes page on the site. You should watch that before you try to use them. There's a little bit of a learning curve, but I promise that it's not near as intimidating as it looks. So there are going to be all these different tabs for the salary specific ranges, and then this final tab is LineupHQ data. So what this is just a lookup, a couple different lookup formulas that are pulling in data from the overall tab. And what it's pulling in is it's pulling in the name, the fantasy points, and the max exposure. And this max exposure is actually looking directly at the XVal. Now, this isn't just a straight up lookup formula. There's a little bit of logic in there that kind of caps things out a little bit. We don't want somebody who has an XVal of 100% or more to be able to be 100% used in all of your lineups. One of the things about MME is reducing the volatility and reducing the amount of variance that you have in your builds. Some people really like to take super heavy stands. Some people will have 100% exposure to one or two different players. Some people will have very high exposures to their core players. Maybe they have 4 players that are 80 or more % owned. I prefer to not do things that way, and I think that if you are MMEing, there's a little bit of a floor that you should want to build in, so you should leave yourself a little bit of leeway to hedge. With that being said, I have a failsafe in here that makes it so that a player can't have more than 75% ownership when they get loaded into the Rotogrinders LineupHQ. So we're going to go over to the Rotogrinders HQ. This is just like the basic page. If you have Rotogrinders subscription, then you have seen this before. The way that you're going to load things in is you're going to go to here where it says projections, upload, download. Click here. You can also click the upload projections, but if you go to the upload, download projections here, it's going to bring you to this screen. We'll say upload your custom projections in CSV format here. Your CSV file should have headers in the first row. So it'll explain things out. What I usually do is I will download this file, and then it'll bring it up here. And then what I want to do is I kind of want to like take this and I want to clear this out, because the only thing that I care about is the name, fantasy points, and max exposure. I don't care about anything else. So I'll delete all of that out. And then I'll actually clear all of this as well. Now, you don't actually have to clear it like I just did there. You can go back to the range of outcomes and you can just highlight all of these columns and then Control C to copy them. and then go back to here, right click, and then paste the values. And then that will just paste the values straight down. You do have these reference errors because they're because of the lookup formulas that are in there, but you can just go through and you can clear those out. So then what you'll have is the name, fantasy points, and the exposure limits that you'll have for each individual player on the slate. Notice that there are some 0 exposures in here. And the reason for that, even if players project okay, like Bam projects okay, he's a negative XVal in the sheets. So I don't actually want any of him. And I talk about that in the Discord, but that's not what this video is about. So now I'll just save this. And then that's saved under Projections DraftKings NBA 2020 1231. I will close that, go in, choose file, and then bring that in. And then I usually unclick this because I don't want it to exclude players not in the CSV or with 0 fantasy points. I don't mind having them in there because I'm not going to get them in my runs anyway. I'll just go in and say upload. It will give you some like names that maybe don't match. CJ McCollum, yes, that's CJ McCollum. Derek Jones, yes, that's Derek Jones. And then this one, if it doesn't give you the options right away, you unclick skip this row, and then usually it'll have the right player. So then you hit submit. They submit. Kill that. All right, so now the pay dirt projections are loaded in. You can see that the original source value for Giannis was 54 and my projection is 59. You can also see that the max percentage exposures were loaded over here. So the next thing that I do is I'll go to build rules. The range of outcomes, I don't ever mess with any of this. It doesn't really matter. When you're running optimals, then the thing about like the range of outcomes and like the randomness is all it does is just like apply a percent up or down based on the projection that was loaded in. So if you have a player range of outcomes of like 10%, then what it's going to do is it's going to take the player's projection and then it's going to plus or minus 10% of that projection, and then it'll use that and it'll randomize between those things. It does add randomness, but it's not necessary for NBA, and it's certainly not necessary with the way that I have things set up in the sheets. Number of lineups to produce, I'll just produce 50 because that's what I play with. The number of unique players is really the only thing that I think really matters here, and it's important to have 3. At the very least 2, at the very max 4. You want to make sure that you're having lineups that are different enough between players, that you are spreading things out enough that you're going to be able to get enough combinations with the players that you have around your core to give yourself a good chance to win. Like if you want to have a super tight core and you don't want to have a lot of unique players, like if you limit that to 1, then you might as well just be single entry. You might as well just be hand building your lineups because then you're not really utilizing the optimizer to its fullest extent. Like you want to make sure that you are getting a good spread of exposures and a good spread of lineups. I always do 3 unique players, but it's absolutely vital to have more than 1. 4 is pushing it. I like 3. The other thing that you need to go in is go to this players per team and lower this down to 3. Almost always 3 is going to be the max of a team that you can really utilize. There are going to be situations where you have, like last year, the Warriors had only 8 players available and they were all like 3K. In that instance, yeah, you're going to have like 5 of those players just because they're all so damn cheap that it's like mathematically not possible for 4 of them to not make value unless they only score like 40 points as a team. So limit this down to 3. And then after that, usually I'll just build. And I'll build 1 run and I'll see what it gives me. And then I'll start looking at things and I'll start pruning things down and kind of like making some more expectations. So right off the bat, one thing that I want to mention is that looking at these lineups comes after you have messed around with player exposures. So I don't care about this top lineup. Like I don't care about that at all. What I care more about is looking over here and seeing how my actual exposures matched up to what I wanted, right? So I wanted a lot of Chris Middleton. I wanted 75% and I got 75%. PJ Washington wanted 75%, got 75%. Going down the list a little bit, Dorian Finney-Smith only came up as 59%, even though I wanted 72%. So I might want to boost him, depending on what else I see. As you continue to go down the list, DeAndre Hunter wanted 51, only got 32. LeBron, I wanted 60, but I only got 20. So when it comes to something like that, maybe I'd want to boost him. And the way that I'm going to do that, I'll show you guys here in a sec. As you can continue going down, Daniel Theis, or Tice, or however the hell you pronounce his name, I think actually has a negative LevX score. I'm going to go back and check. So, let's see. Yeah, so Daniel Theis actually has a negative LevX score, and he ended up in my projection run. So that's something that I don't want to have, and I knew that because this didn't actually lock into a min-max. So I'm just going to remove him because the model doesn't like him. As I'm going farther down, Kevin Durant only showed up in 14%, but I wanted 40. So with a situation like that, what I want to do is I want to go back to the range of outcomes. And if I didn't get enough, first off, I want to see how much he's projected for. And he's projected 43, which is pretty good. 22% ownership. And I wanted 40, like that was what his cap was. But I want at least 30. Like I'll use a T-val as kind of a floor exposure. So this is how much I want to force. If I think that he reaches tournament value 30% of the time, then I want to force him to at least 30% in my runs. So in here, I only got 14%. I'm going to put in 30% here now because that's how much I wanted of him. That's what his T-val is. That's how often I think he reaches GPP score. So I want 30% of him. And I'll usually do that with a couple of the higher upside guys. So like LeBron, I'll do the same thing. I'm going to go back into the ROO. I want to find LeBron James. So LeBron James hits tournament value 34% of the time. I want to bump him up. I don't want to bump him all the way up to this 60%, but I want to bump him up to as often as I think that he hits GPP value. And I'll keep going through and kind of trying to find guys like that. So Jaylen Brown, Dennis Schroeder. Dennis Schroeder is somebody who I only got 10%, but he's only going to be 5% owned. So I'm going to go back in. I'm going to try to find Dennis Schroeder. He projects okay, not great. He's only going to be 5% owned, and that's why there's such a large disparity for his XVal. So maybe I don't want a lot of him. Let me find an example of somebody that projects badly, but that I got a decent amount of. Somebody like Danilo Gallinari, where he's only 2% owned, and that's why I got a 40. Well, actually, hold on. Let's try to find somebody who's a little bit better than that. Maybe Andre Iguodala. So Andre Iguodala is only 15. I mean, I only got one of him, but like he only has an XVal of 15. He's only going to be 1% owned. That means that his T-val is only 16%. His projection probably isn't that good, so I'm just going to X him out. Eubanks is probably coming in because of no LMA. Danilo Gallinari, I think that I probably am okay with 6% of him. Dennis Schroeder, I'm probably okay with 10% of him. So now that I kind of have an idea of where my exposures should be and like people that I kind of wanted to boost, then I am going to rerun things. And then this next run, hopefully, I definitely will not have any Daniel Theis. Hopefully I see a bit more LeBron James. I do. That's good. See a bit more Kevin Durant. That's awesome. But then you need to look through and see, okay, what did that take away and what did that add? So for sure, it's going to like add some guys that maybe I didn't want a lot of and push them up. So I got a little bit more Drew Eubanks in this run. I got some Precious Achiuwa, or I don't know how to pronounce his name, but like I definitely don't want any of him. He only has an XVal of 5%. I'm just going to take him out. Grayson Allen has actually a pretty decent XVal for being 15% owned, but for him, I want to jump back in. I'm going to sort this by XVal. And then I want to try to find Grayson Allen and say, okay, so he's 3,600. He's projected for 17. He really only has a T-val of 10%. The only reason why he is even being like remotely exposed in my runs is because he's only going to be 4% owned. If he ends up being 10% owned, he ends up being like kind of a bad play. If he's 15% owned, like I don't want any of him. So for me to have 4% of him, I kind of just want to X him out. Maxi Kleber, same thing. Like he's projected to be 9% owned. he was only 11% XVal in the first place, and I just think that if he gets up to 10% owned, I really don't want any of him. Dwight Powell, probably the same. Don't really want any of him. So then I'll just keep doing that over and over again, and this is kind of the thing that I do for like the hour leading up to lock. And I'll do this until I get to exposures that I think make a lot of sense and I think put me in a good place to actually have a chance to take down a GPP. So the last thing that I kind of want to point out really quick is that I will go through these exposures as well, the ones that I don't have any of. Like these are players that I don't have any of. And I'll try to find guys that have a high XVal that maybe I want to bump. So like Damian Lillard is an example here. He's only going to be 3% owned and his XVal is 30. So I go back into the ROO and I'll say, all right, where is Damian Lillard? And he is a high projection but not a high XVal. So yeah, I kind of want to force like 16% of him. If he's only going to be 3% owned, then I want to have some exposure to him. So I'll just force him 15%. People aren't going to have him, and he's super high upside, so I might want to have some of him at least a little bit, right? And I'll then rerun with that. So that's kind of how I do things, kind of how I prune things out. A couple important things to note really quick, and I'll go back and into the ROO and talk about this really quick. When I sort by XVal, one of the things that I want to look at is players that actually have a chance to do well. So somebody like Andre Iguodala here, he's projected for 17. The only reason why I would be getting exposures of him is simply because he's going to be super duper low owned. He doesn't really have that high of 7x percentage. He doesn't have that good of a projection. I don't know that he actually has a chance to do super well. And if he ends up being like 4% owned, then he's probably a bad play. Somebody like Gorgui Dieng, feasibly I could end up with 10% of him, but he's really not that good of a play. I try to avoid people who aren't projected for over 20 fantasy points. So I'll go back and forth between the LineupHQ and the Range of Outcomes, and I'll kind of like pull guys out that aren't projected for over 20 fantasy points, because at that point I think that it's a little bit too fringy, and when I do MME I'm a little bit more conservative than when I build single entry lineups. So this has just been kind of a talk through of how to load the Range of Outcomes into the Rotogrinders LineupHQ, and a little bit about how I like to set up my player pool for MME. Hopefully this has been a little bit helpful. If you guys have questions about any of the things and how they apply to like 20 max or something like that, you can hit me up in the Discord. But hopefully this has been helpful, and happy grinding.